You can support this podcast at patreon.com/partnersincrimemedia.
I'm Rebecca Lavoie, and this is Crime Writers On. Crime Writers On is the original true crime review podcast that digs into true crime, pop culture, other podcasts. And on this episode, a pair of pioneering podcasters are pulled into the perils of parasocial relationships. What happened in the comments section to make them end their show? We'll discuss the podcast, Beth's Dead. Joining me to get that done and more is true crime author, TV journalist, and host of These Are Their Stories podcast, my husband and the love of my life, Kevin Flynn. Hello, Kevin.
Hello, Rebecca.
Also with us, private investigator, certified pet detective, resident cat lady, and author of The Final Curtain, Laura Bricker. Hi, Laura.
Hey, Rebecca.
And finally, it's our captain of all things cynical, author of the City Trilogy, host of Rip Current, More Like Ancient Phalians, Strange Arrivals, and the Patreon Deep Dive Book Club podcast, Toby Ball. Hola, Toby.
Hey, Rebecca.
So, Kevin, this is Monday's program.
Yes.
What's coming up on Thursday's show?
On Thursday, we're going to talk about the mystery series on Apple TV. It's called Down Cemetery Road.
That will be New Year's Day, right?
Yes, it would be on New Year's Day.
All right. I have two things from listeners that I would like to share with you all.
All right.
The first one is from
Speaking of parasocial relationships.
Our longtime listener, Alex Oliveira, sent me the message, and he said this. Why does Toby seem too old for any version of slang? Even hoops sounds too youthful for him.
Hoops?
Thoughts, Toby? Hoops.
I've been saying hoops since the 70s. I don't know. That's an interesting question.
Oh, okay. I have another one. Remember last week when we recorded about the show Predators?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you remember Decoy Danny?
Yeah.
Do you know what Decoy Danny, who was the decoy the day that guy ended up shooting himself, do you know what he does for a living?
I think he's like a TV journalist or
He's
an anchor.
a local news anchor.
Yeah.
For Claudia Burke, who says one of our local news guys was the lure in that Texas incident. He was clearly traumatized afterwards. It broke my heart. And I said, wait, you mean Decoy Danny? She said, yes, his name is Dan Schreck, and he's a wonderful anchor, and I had absolutely no idea. Isn't that wild?
Wow.
Well, if people had an idea, they wouldn't have fallen for Decoy Danny in the first place.
I don't think he was a decoy while he was a news anchor. Kevin.
No, none of us are.
He and Jerry Springer.
Yes, exactly. All right. Should we go ahead and talk about the podcast we're supposed to be talking about in this episode?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right. Leading off.
Oh my God, I'm still saying the same lines.
I still love listening to Totally Married and Totally Mommy. So, 1, you're great, and 2, I'm weird.
Ew.
In the 2010s, Totally Lame wrote the blueprint for podcasts with hot takes, humorous advice, and an engaged audience. Among Elizabeth Laime and Andy Rosen's colorful group of listeners was one woman struggling with a relationship affected by her past stint as a model.
I expected that I'd never have to interact with the few people who would see those pictures. The problem was, I guess people liked my look because my pictures got spread all over the net, without me seeing another dime, of course.
A subset of listeners grew increasingly reliant on Laime's attention, and when tragedy struck, the host questioned what went wrong. But as they dug deeper into what happened, Laime and Rosen feared something more sinister was at play.
It's a crazy story. It involves Elizabeth and Andy having their locks changed, the LAPD stepping in, and the death of a listener. When we started this project, our goal was to tell that story. But it ended up taking us on a path we could have never imagined.
The podcast, Beth's Dead, looks into the dangers of parasocial relationships and the mystery behind why Laime and Rosen ended their trailblazing show. Armchair Expert's Monica Padman holds extended chats with the couple to recount their story and help them confront the unsettled questions of what really happened. Spoiler alert, we're going to be talking about plot points from Beth's Dead. So if you want to remain spoiler-free, go to the estimated time code in our show notes for our thumbs up or thumbs down reviews. Polling the group, because I know this makes a big difference in one's listening experience of the podcast. Are there any OG, Totally Lame, or Totally Married fans on this panel?
Never heard of it.
And the only person raising their hand is Rebecca.
Yes.
I think that goes to my first comment that I sent was, this is an inside baseball kind of show. And if you listen to their other podcast, you're probably interested in this. I have never listened to any of their podcasts, so I had no idea what was happening.
Yeah. What about you, Kevin? You have something along those same lines.
Yeah. I mean, lots of respect for Totally Lame. Actually, a real pioneer in sort of the world of grassroots podcasting. I know that you are a big fan of the show and was a big inspiration for you on style and everything.
Oh,
so
Married
a lot
with
of
Podcast
respect.
is totally a ripoff of Totally Married.
Yeah,
100%.
I actually wondered that as I was listening. I was like, this seems a
100%.
lot like Married with Podcast.
Yeah.
Totally ripped off from them.
But if it seems like that if you weren't a fan of the show, then much of this will seem unappealing or at least unfamiliar in a way that you couldn't just jump into. And that's sort of the way this is all set up, is that you can't parachute into the story here. Otherwise, A, you're going to feel kind of a little lost at points, and B, the comfortable nature among the three of them is going to feel a little foreign.
I'm just going to say, for any listeners who can hear it, there's a very loud vacuum cleaner right over our heads right now. Toby, were you going to add something to that?
Oh, I was just going to say, I'd never even heard of this show or any of the people, but I felt like they spent a hell of a lot of time like telling us what the show was about. Mm-hmm. I obviously stuck with it because we were going to review it. But I was like, Jesus Christ, like, I feel like we have to listen to a whole different podcast before we can even get into this podcast.
Right.
And after a while, you come to see why they did it. But like with everything else kind of in this podcast, like they really take their time. Like they're not in any hurry to do anything, as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
Which in some cases would drive me insane. But it just so happened that I was going to spend a lot of time walking around Valencia, like trying to find places where I could go Christmas shopping. And so I wasn't really in much of a hurry. So them taking their time was perfectly fine.
Wait a second. Toby, as we're recording this, it's December 23rd.
Yep.
Were you doing Christmas shopping today?
No. This was over the weekend.
All right, good. Just checking.
Yeah, because they had these Christmas markets that were open. I mean, they're probably open now too, but they're over the weekend. But I was just kind of, instead of like Google mapping every single thing, I was like, I basically got to go in this direction. So I'll just kind of walk around, check things out. So, which kind of felt like the way the podcasting was. It's like, well, we're going to kind of go in this direction. We'll kind of like take our time and maybe go on a few side things, but we'll eventually get there. So it was kind of fitting my mood, I guess.
Yeah. I'm just going to say, even as a listener to Totally Lame and Totally Married, I found the whole setup of this podcast incredibly difficult to listen to. Mm-hmm. I found myself fast forwarding through some of it, like putting it on 3 times speed to get through that stuff. I realized
this
later...
This is a 2 times speed and you won't miss anything.
Yeah, it is. I realized later that the clips they chose to play were relevant to the story later. I only realized that later, but they made no allusion to that at the time. And the clips were very long. Mm-hmm. And Laura, they also spent a tremendous amount of time on this podcast reading correspondence. Thoughts?
Yeah, I was like, maybe I've been doing this podcast thing wrong, because they just basically read like emails that they had received or sent and then chatted about them. And at first it was kind of interesting. I was like, oh, this is an interesting window, because I think about like, again, that parasocial relationship angle and like, how do we respond to listeners who reach out to us in a way that's like engaging, but also not too close and keeping a boundary and listening to this. But then it was episode after episode after episode of reading emails and comments.
As just one example, without glasses or contacts, Natasha is almost blind in one eye from a beating. It's like so specific, blind in one eye.
Yeah. Well, you have to get specific. As a good writer,
Yeah, the details.
They're just reading more emails like over and over. It started to feel, and I hate to say this, it started to feel a little self-indulgent at that point.
Yeah. When I say that Married with Podcast is a ripoff of Totally Lame, one of the things we do on Married with Podcast is telescope the inbound emails, because you really don't need an 8-page thing with just from, you can get the gist of what someone is saying by cutting out the stuff that they're saying. I'm sorry that
especially
I'm doing
when
this
someone's fan fiction of a real life.
Exactly.
The extra details. But Laura, I think as part of the setup is that it isn't a story. It's 3 people recording straight to tape, talking about, as you say, events and situations and settings that most of us don't know. And at no point I guess we'll lay this on Monica, because she's the host. She's supposed to be the guide for the audience. At no point do they really talk to the audience.
Correct.
Right? It's talking amongst themselves. They throw out some certain things. But if this were to be a story presented like most nonfiction podcast stories, there would be some narrations. Even if it's like a large, there'd be some sort of cutting back and forth. This just ends up being very stream of conscience, between the people here with no discretion about what might actually be interesting and what things might actually move this story along, as opposed to just sort of like, hey, remember when that thing happened? That was great.
Yeah.
Or that was horrible.
Counterpoint is
Oh, counterpoint.
Well, all
Toby.
right.
I thought part of what I liked about this podcast is that you're also hearing the dynamics between them, which I think would have been different if they had been directing it towards the audience. And I certainly wouldn't want every podcast to be like this, but it was kind of interesting hearing their different reactions to things, even though they were on the same basic end of the sort of alarmism and deep in your feelings scale.
What end is that?
The far end.
Okay.
Well, it's kind of like you were a fly on a wall, right? You're just listening to somebody. It's like you're at a party, you don't know anybody, and you just end up like standing, drinking a beer next to these people who you don't really know, but they're talking about this fucked up story that happened. And you're just like, this is kind of interesting. And that's just kind of the way I took it the whole way through. But then especially the guy, I'm not going to remember any of these people's names.
Andy.
There's only 3 names to remember.
Andy, Elizabeth, and Monica. All you need to know.
Yeah, the fact that he was like kind of checked out for a lot of it, it's like, oh yeah, well, I didn't know any of this was going on. But then when she came in sobbing uncontrollably, then I realized that blah, blah, blah. So yeah, I didn't mind that much. I mean, it's kind of felt like, you know how you used to have these games where like you'd get like texts on your phone and you get like letters and stuff. Like you could sign up for these things. So there's sort of these immersive games. It kind of felt like that, where you're just kind of listening. You're trying to kind of piece things together from a conversation where you don't have any like interstitial stuff or anything like that.
Right. I think it's interesting your observation about Andy being checked out, because it very much, first of all, plays into the dynamic of how they were on their podcast many years ago. Like she was struggling to find work as a writer in LA. Like she's really struggling. She had been with a UCB and all these things, but then she was like, nothing was working out at that point. And so she really threw herself into making these podcasts, especially like when I would hear her, like she'd be like, oh, so we're recording late today because I went to the post office to mail all of our merch. And I remember thinking like, you're doing what now? Like you're literally stuffing envelopes, and it was a very homemade, homespun thing. And he's a record producer, so he was out all day being a record producer. And when he would say things like, there's a whole bit once where he kept telling her how he wanted to open a sandwich shop because it would be cool. And she was like, you're a fucking record producer. What is the matter with you? Like they had this very like personal dynamic, but I think the personalness of their dynamic, look how much I know about them, right? I think it plays into kind of like what went wrong here, because I really get the sense, Laura, that Elizabeth didn't have a good sense of like what boundaries should be between her and people who were responding. I think she was so excited to get the engagement that she didn't think about those boundaries. What do you think?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That was a huge, takeaway for me, is listening to this and listening to the way, like we all love it when we get listener email from somebody who really loves something that we've said or can relate to something in our lives that we've talked about. It's part of what we do. We like to engage with our listeners. But in listening to hers, it was like something was missing in another part of her life where she was latching on to the connection with her listeners in a way that she was becoming so enmeshed with them, with these responses, that when they were talking about how quickly she was emailing back and forth and the type of advice she was giving and the type of like validation she was getting in a way from being a support to, particularly in this case, obviously Beth and Natasha, and going back and forth to the point that she's looking at nude photos and like, no, your nipples look great. And it's hard because I think you're like, what's the appropriate balance when you're in a position where you're kind of in a public place and you have people that know you from that, and that's part of why they like what you're doing. But at the same time, it's like, how do you keep the balance there with giving some of yourself, but also keeping that boundary at a professional distance, especially when people listen to you on a podcast, they think they know you because they've listened to you. And as I think they said in this, like they know the version that they've listened to.
Correct.
They don't know everything. And so it's definitely a skill that is something that you learn, I think. I mean, I think about when I used to write newspaper articles, I used to write columns when I was pregnant, and it was like everywhere I went, people would like, oh, is this that baby we've read so much about? It used to drive my ex-husband crazy.
Yeah.
Because he was like, why does everybody have to know everything?
Yeah.
But in this case, you can see the setup here of like, this is a slippery slope. This is not going to end well.
And you don't have to show us your nipples to join us on Patreon.
Oh, wow. You don't?
Oh,
No.
but if you do, that would be
Talk
exciting.
about a slippery slope, am I right?
A slippery nipple?
Yeah, there you go. Thanks, Laura,
Isn't
for
that
saying
a drink?
it. You just set it up.
Business
But,
section time.
yeah, I mean, I'm happy to judge, but I don't actually judge. If you join us at patreon.com/partners in crime media, you can sustain this podcast to get all sorts of exclusive content, including the Crime Writers on After Show, and sort of mining that whole totally lame vibe. Rebecca is going to be sharing a story from her life, which is the crown that she got put in last week, which was like...
Stop, don't spoil
No?
it. But I'll just say, do you remember when I said I was nervous about an upcoming dentist appointment? I was right to be. I was right. That's all I'm going to say about it.
Pretty bad, pretty bad. Other exclusive content includes Toby Ball's Deep Dive Book Club podcast. The book that Toby and his guests have just discussed is By the Fire We Carry. We have new episodes of Married with Podcast coming back. Right, Rebecca?
Yes, we do.
All right. Again, sort of stealing everything we can from Totally Married. We have...
Now, I'm putting it on Patreon, to be clear.
There we go. Shameless.
Shameless.
Absolutely shameless.
Oh, I think we had our Patreon first.
At the $1,000 level?
The
Yes.
$1,000 level. One level, one person, $1,000. But can we get that back, apparently, is what they want to say. Hey, Something's Off is actually a podcast that Rebecca and Mel Barrett make, and it looks into all sorts of interesting things, including the transcripts of all those sidebar conversations from the Karen Reed trial. Rebecca?
Yes.
I'll see you at Sidebar.
See you side by.
Mr.
Flynn.
If you join us at the Bricker scale level, you'll also get Laura Bricker's Leave It to Bricker podcast, in which Laura and Yukon Cornelius from Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer went into the White Mountain National Forest to cut down a Christmas tree, which apparently is legal to do.
I will never not see it. I'm sorry, Laura. You are in love with Yukon Cornelius from...
It's okay. It's okay. We have a great Halloween costume for next year.
Incredible.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
incredible.
If you join us at the Let's Do What We Do level, you get episodes of Crime Writers on early and ad-free. And if you become a deep diver, you are an official sponsor of Toby Ball's Deep Dive Book Club. Toby, you've started to put together the list for 2026. What is the first book that everybody ought to be boning up on for 2026?
The first book is The Lumumba Plot, The Secret History of the CIA and a Cold War Assassination by Stuart Reed. And it's a little long, although I think a lot of it might be footnotes. So I gave you an extra month to read it.
And if you want to see the complete list for 2026 and purchase your book or your audio book there, you can go to our Amazon storefront. It's amazon.com/shop/Crime Writers On, in addition to all the other great stuff we have for recommendations. Look for Toby Ball's 2026 Deep Dive. All the books are there, and you can get them.
You want to know a little secret?
Yeah.
Apparently one of those books is a redo from 2018.
Oh. A redo?
Totally forgot about it.
You mean you've done it already on the Deep Dive?
Okay, so he's skipping a month. He's doing a book he's already done.
Uh-huh.
You're really phoning this one in.
Yeah.
The rest of it's just AI, so it'll be cool.
Oh.
Yeah. Fantastic. Remember to go to our shop. We earn commission on qualified purchases. And look, if you didn't get what you wanted for Christmas, meaning a subscription to our Patreon, remember you can try it for free for 7 days, and you'll save 10% with an annual membership.
All right, Kevin, does it thus end our business section?
Thus ends the business section.
All right, let's fade that music out. So, Toby, this podcast made me think. It made me think about the real life friends I've made from making this podcast. I mean, we have interacted with listeners in real life at events, and some of them have become like dear friends, like actual real life friends. That being said, we know we have thousands of listeners, right? And we don't feel the need to necessarily engage deeply with all of them when they send us inbound communications. We try to reply to as many things as we can. Did it make you think about the line that you draw as somebody doing broadcasting and media between your work and the fandom?
Yeah, a lot. And I wasn't really sure that, it feels more art than science in some ways in trying to figure that stuff out. But I think, I've certainly had conversations with people with whom we've had sort of shared situations or whatever. And what did you do in this situation? Or what did you do in that situation? That kind of thing. but I've never really run into people asking me about serious, like life-changing stuff or like real serious problems like that. And I think if somebody did, it was like, Toby, what do you think I ought to do? I used to pose nude and my fiance doesn't like it. I'd be like, I think you should talk to a therapist. Like, please don't get back to me about this. I've got nothing good to tell you. Just find somebody professional.
Laura wants to see your nipples, though.
Yeah, exactly.
Only if they're slippery.
Either talk to a therapist or send photos to Laura. Yeah, so one of the things I thought was interesting, and again, kind of speaks to not making it sort of directed towards the audience. So one of these various characters that this person was sort of inhabiting would send a message, and then Elizabeth would write back to them, and she would read the message back, and basically the two other people would kind of critique her and sort of be like, well, that was pretty good. You didn't go that deep, or yeah, that was good advice, or like, why did you say that? And yeah, like Laura said, like, I feel as though the fact that she's sort of allowing herself to become involved in these sort of very personal decisions that are made by people that she only knows through emails and posts on a website seems very, very strange, and taking on an authority based on having a podcast where you're just chatting, you know? I mean, it's not coming from any point of expertise other than you sound on this show like somebody who would be compassionate to me in this situation, and then responding and being like, well, yes, I am compassionate, and this is how.
Well, these dynamics are not like unique to podcasting. They existed for some time. As I recall, when I worked in radio, this was sort of the thing where the average person thought they had a different kind of relationship with the DJ than they did with the TV news anchor or somebody else, because you could call up the DJ and interact with that person with a request or whatever, and it's also in your ear, so it's also very intimate, and so that has played out before. It's sort of I don't want to say a natural phenomenon, but it's something that like one can expect. And I wonder if people who watch a podcast on video, in a studio and with all the,
I think it's a very different dynamic.
I think
like
it's
TV.
Exactly. I think it's different than, again, an audio podcast where I'm in your ear and it seems very like that. Now, as far as like,
it depends.
Parasocial relationship,
I think, because if you do lives, if you're interacting with people in the comments, I think it's more opening. But I think if you're Amy Poehler, I don't think that's happening to you.
Right. So, I think parasocial relationship sort of has a negative connotation where I think it's just sort of a classification of a kind of social dynamic. There is largely a one-way nature between our listeners and us, although we do what we can, again, to sort of engage in that and make that two-way, and the relationships among the listeners too. I mean, we know so many people who became friends because of our show, and the same thing happens with a lot of other shows. I would have liked to see a lot more sort of exploration of that social phenomenon like they did with Stalkers, where they had that expert come on to talk about that. Are the parasocial relationships good or bad, or, are there healthy ones? That whole thing there. I mean, I think that there was something to mine that they didn't go for, other than talking about their experiences in medias res here.
Didn't they get that Australian woman?
Well, she talked more about the stalker, right?
She didn't
talk about the parasocial. She talked about the traits. I mean, I was going to say, it's like I think I agree with you, Kevin, that there was something to mine there, because we are immediately like, oh, parasocial relationships aren't real, they're bad. I'm thinking about how my son and his peers meet so many new friends. And I'm like, how'd you meet that person? Oh, I met them on Snapchat. And then they meet in real life. So a lot of times, I hate to say I sound like an old person. That's how the younger generation is meeting people. But there is something to be said for that's how people are meeting.
Online relationships are real relationships.
There are also catfishers in online relationships.
There are. My son had some friend in Virginia that he met online, and then they would play video games. And I was always like, how do you know this is, But again, Kevin, like you're saying, what is that sort of psychology of the person who is able to form a relationship that way as opposed to face-to-face in real life? And has this just provided sort of another means for people that maybe don't have the same in-person social skills to actually form connections that they wouldn't have been able to do before? They had that ability to do something online. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. I think about... one thing I think about the catfishing parasocial relationship, which is what this is. It's like a double thing. How many times does suicide come into play in that? I mean, we experienced this in our home.
Yeah.
One of our kids,
typical exit strategy,
had all these like this very rich communicative circle online, and like it seemed like somebody was either talking about suicide or saying they did it and then magically popping up again at some point in the future. Like that seems to be a theme that also I think makes this podcast tricky because they're talking about a fake suicide here, and the fake suicide. Objectively, there are some very funny things about this catfishing situation, but the sort of flipness with which the fake suicide is discussed, until you really realize what's going on, you're like, I really hope this is fake. I found myself thinking that the whole time.
But Beth's dead.
Yes, she is dead. Okay, I want to move on. I found myself at the beginning of when they finally made the reveal about what was going on. Was it episode 4? It took a really long time.
4. Yeah, 4 about sort of the weirdness. 6.
Right.
Episode 6 by the time we realized that there's
and they said they knew who it was.
Mm-hmm.
And they described a professor, a well-known professor living on the East Coast. And then they said enough stuff that it heavily implied this person was a MAGA person. Heavily. And my first thought was, oh my God, they're fucking talking about Alan Dershowitz. And then I thought, how would Alan Dershowitz have time to catfish a podcast? And then later when we get the reveal, and if you don't want to hear who it is, turn it off right now and listen to the podcast. When we get to the reveal that it's actually the person's son, I totally fucking looked up Alan Dershowitz's kids to see if they were about the right age for this. And one of them died and was not the right age. And the other one is a really prominent lawyer. And I think they would have said that on the podcast. So they're not, I don't think they're the right age. Does anybody else find themselves really preoccupied by trying to figure out who the hell they were talking about?
Yes. Yeah. And I found like that was such a distraction. It was like this red herring, like we know who it is, but we can't tell you who it is. But they're this person and they're a professor and they're in academia and they were traveling here. But we're so scared of them. We're not going to say, but we're going to say. And then you realize they never actually really proved who it was. And you realize that when you get to the end. But yeah, I was like, who could it be?
Yeah.
Who could it be?
They seemed especially freaked out when there was that long email that was ostensibly from the woman that the husband wrote for her because English wasn't her first language. And he was talking about the Holocaust and right and wrong in that email. And they just had this pause there.
The concept that requires faith in my argument is that, for example, the Holocaust was evil as opposed to something that simply happened. Morality is completely beyond the reach of quantifiable science.
Whoa.
That should be the tagline for this whole...
Oh my God, shouldn't it?
That made me think, oh, this is definitely reflective of the person they're talking about, the professor person. This must be somehow reflected in something this person is doing now or did do recently, because they seem to have signaled that a lot. I mean, Toby, they signaled that a lot, right?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like, I don't know how many people are listening to this, but if it gets on Reddit, I'm sure that, crowdsourced, they would probably be able to figure it out in a few days.
Yeah. So, Kevin,
yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? Because there was this sort of thread of mystery throughout the thing, and that's why we listen to this. It's allegedly a true crime podcast.
And sort of we picked that up sort of in passing, again, as sort of like casual comments or drop comments about, we figured out this and blah, 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 moved right along. And, I think probably the original premise of this podcast was, okay, we had this thing happen to us. It pretty much tanked our show. And then we realized that we believe a well-known public figure turned MAGA figure was the catfish that spooked us and caused this whole big thing. And then, we hear them hem and haw about it for 4.5 hours about, what to do. And then we get another 9 minutes of them discussing their indecision about what to respond to the email is. So I definitely think that they sort of had this concept that, all right, let's go and dive into this. We didn't hear a whole lot about how this led to the demise of their show. Yeah. Again, that was sort of a promised thing. And we didn't get hardly any discussion about this left us. None. Okay, great. I didn't want to say none in case there was some.
And then we decided to end the show because we were freaked out. That didn't really happen.
I mean, that was the emotional thing to explore. Why? And why did you decide to come back? And it just seems like the whole podcast was not worth doing unless you were going to approach you don't have to dig in and find out who the catfish was. You had a main suspect, right? Why didn't you just go there? And it's like, why do we have to wait 6 episodes for you to kind of get you to say, okay, how about the thing that we do is go after it? And I know that is not my criticism alone. I know a lot of people are saying, what the actual fuck? Why couldn't we just cut to the chase here?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it was exhausting.
I mean, maybe there was an episode. I mean, this is coming from a big podcast network, right? Armchair, which is big. I don't listen to their shows. I don't like them because they're not for me, the armchair shows. But that doesn't mean I know they're incredibly popular, and I would never try to tell somebody whose show was 100 million times more popular than mine how to make their show. It's just not for me. But like other networks, I'm sure they make promises to advertisers about how long a show will be. And this show had incredible marketing. It was Apple Podcast featured more than once. There's all these different marketing opportunities. The armchair marketing opportunity, there's the true crime angle marketing opportunity, and then there's the fans of Elizabeth and Andy opportunity. And they really capitalized on that. So there were ads in the show, and I wonder if there was a promise. And so there were many episodes, like the first 3 could have been one, like very easily. And I think it would have made the podcast better.
So is the show, like whatever their first show that this whole thing happened around, was it kind of like this, like the pacing and the chatting and stuff?
It was kind of like this. Their show, Totally Lame, was the two of them chatting, and then they had bits on the show. They'd have a guest sometimes, usually, and they'd have bits on the show where they asked, different people, comedians usually would come on, like people that you would have heard of, and then they would ask them the same like 20 questions, and it was like jean jackets, yes or no. It was like something about Oprah. Like there was like 20 questions. It was very formatic. It definitely had a looseness to it, but it was a formatic looseness that I think really worked. And then the Totally Married was literally a rambling advice show where they would in fact read the entire emails, which was the only thing I didn't like about it. Also, by the way, she's not wrong. She has evolved in her views. She used to read much more conservative, not politically, but personally, than she reads now on this show, which I think is interesting. But she did say that Andy, by the way, seems like he's exactly the same.
I just, like, my theory about it without knowing anything about their show was that this fucked up thing happened to us. Maybe we can do a true crime show about that thing, but in the style of the shows that we've done in the past. And that way we'll be like the best of both worlds. We'll get like our people who like to listen to us just gad on about this and that, the other thing. And then we'll get the true crime people. Cause it just kind of felt, again, like they weren't really in much of a hurry, for
you think?
Like, I think to Kevin's point and Lara's point, it's just like, you didn't get the feeling that they were too concerned about entertaining you in any particular way. It was just like, we're going to talk about this shit and we're going to record it and then we're going to put it out there because we think people will listen to it.
Yeah. And I don't think of it as true crime because for me, if it was going to be true crime, we should have had some more information up front about the catfisher being identified, about the police involvement, like framed more as a mystery as opposed to this sort of contemplative, reflective look back of like, well, geez, I can't believe I said those things. Oh my God, I said that. Oh my God. And I feel like it was pegged as this true crime mystery, but for me, it just felt more like an examination of themselves in a way of like, we're going to reflect on this thing that happened to us. And we have this person here that wants to tell our story that knows us. And the people that listen to our podcast are going to be really interested in it. But it really wasn't much of a mystery.
Yeah, somebody put this down as being in the true crime genre for when they, uploaded it and all the SEO and whatever. And it may not have been either of the three of them, but it's kind of like it doesn't really fit anything in that genre.
So one of the things I found interesting about the show, now I have a lot of criticisms of it, a lot having to do with the lugubrious unfolding of it, which I was listening to, and I was like, anyone who doesn't know who these people are will not be able to listen to this. If you do, you might be able to. But they do have an episode where they talk to somebody who is an expert on catfishing, this academic, right? And she tells them what she thinks is going to happen if they get in touch with their catfisher. He's going to become the victim to try to make them feel bad for him. He's going to do all these things, and they're going to be really confused.
The other thing we also thought with narcissists, though, is that they actually could take some enjoyment in being able to manipulate people of profile, which may be like your exact case that you described as well, in that being able to manipulate you gave them a sense of superiority. They had control over you.
I know that they have the call with the guy who ends up being the son of the person they suspected, and they feel really bad after that call. But didn't that guy, Kevin, do everything that lady said that a catfisher would do?
Kind of, yeah. Yeah. I mean, is it a sad story? Sure.
If it's true.
If it's true, or if it's, not completely embellished. Was the guy, like he said, was he an addict? Yeah. I mean, could be. Everybody's happy that, he's cleaned up his life, but did he sort of use that as, a catch-all excuse for the bad behavior? It just seemed like, why weren't they prepared for that? right? Why did they sort of just, I don't want to say swallow it whole, but they prepped and talked about like, oh, okay, there may be a level of narcissism and psychopathy and, all these other things.
We hear them writing their emails.
Right, and so maybe they, were so built up on the idea. They were so close to where this was that they just pictured this. Actually, well, they were actually waiting for somebody else. They were surprised that it wasn't.
They thought it was the dad.
They thought it was the dad. And
they
then
thought
this
it was
comes
Alan
in.
Dershowitz. Just kidding.
Yeah. And they were so on their back foot after that they really went into like, okay, this is who this is, and it's really sad. And it may be, but it sort of played out exactly like they were warned that it would.
You're shitty to the people around you when you're an addict, but you don't think you're going to hurt people you don't even know and that you think highly of, because I do think highly of Andy and Elizabeth.
Let's think about it. Who's going to go in and be like, you're full of shit? You say you're an addict? I don't know if I believe that. Like, are you sure that's really what happened? You lied about everything else. Like, I think when somebody comes out with a vulnerable story, nobody wants to be the person that says, oh, you've just confided this thing that seems very vulnerable coming from you about your addiction and your period that you were in life. Nobody wants to come out and question that, because then you sound like a shithead, even though they were prepared for it. But that's not something that you learn, I think, that skill. Like, I think about different interviews I do for work, and there's times where I'm like, is this really what's happening, or are you just full of shit?
Yeah.
And it took me years to get to that point. But I think in this situation, they had built this thing up so much in their head. And like, it was fucking exhausting listening to the setup and the background of how this interview was going to take place and what they were going to ask and all these detailed questions they were going to ask. And then it just like all went by the wayside. And I'm like, the guy did sound credible. He did sound like he was an addict. And
I'm not saying he didn't, Laura, but I am saying he did all the things that lady said he would do.
Often, addicts don't remember what they did. Addicts do a lot of stupid shit to fuel their addiction. They become totally focused on themselves in that moment because that's all they can think about. But it felt like kind of flat. I was like, so that's it? Then they rehashed it afterwards and they're like, there's one more episode. I'm like, for what? To rehash it again?
We're taping this, it hasn't come out publicly yet, the last episode. So.
Okay. So I thank God. So I'm like, what are we going to rehash in that?
Well, they needed time to absorb it.
I just want to give Toby a chance to react to that.
Yeah, I mean, my feeling was like you just spent, I guess, years like manipulating these people in the most absurd possible fucking ways. Like, I'm committing suicide. She tried to commit suicide, but she shot herself in the head. She's still alive, and she sent you $1,000. I mean, she's just all this stuff, and then totally manipulating them, totally getting them to believe whatever it is from any of these multiple personalities that they're inhabiting on thing. And then you're like surprised when he can manipulate them just by trying to be one person over the phone. Like, I was just like, this guy knows you well enough to know what's going to hit your sympathy notes, right? I mean, this sort of redemptive arc is going to feel very satisfying to them as a way of resolving this whole issue. Is like, this person's gotten their acts together. They did something bad. They're trying to make up for it. I felt bad for him. Maybe he's past this and we can all kind of feel good about the way this was. I mean, I think one of them says this resolved in the best possible way I can imagine.
It was beautiful.
It's like, well, no shit. It's because this guy knows exactly what's going to strike that chord with you. And he struck it. And it could very well be true. And just by coincidence, it works out that way. But that's all it would be, is a coincidence, because when they walked away thinking that, I was like, so this entire affair has been for nothing. Like, you've learned zero from this. The whole thing that you should have walked away from this being is, we are manipulable and we should not be taking everything at face value, especially coming from this person who's been manipulating us for all this time. And instead they took it at absolutely face value and then walked away saying, this is such a great outcome. And I was like, why don't you listen to your whole podcast again and then see what you think when that's done?
I mean, I truly felt like some compassion for him. I felt like...
How could you not? I mean...
Yeah.
And also, like, we were so surprised that he was going to play ball and do this. And I think...
We thought we had to kind of trick him into it.
And he was prepared. I mean, it's almost like he's like, come of it what may.
That's part of what made it good in my mind. Is that, I mean, it's not intentionally, but they're so kind of open and flowing and stuff that they don't really understand what's getting across.
Yeah.
Or maybe they do and they don't give a shit, which is entirely possible because they seem smart. But I don't know how you come away feeling confident about that was the actual story behind all this.
Yeah, I'll just say one funny thing in the podcast that I thought was really funny, like then and now, is when the catfisher started saying that we all live in an apartment complex together. I didn't want to tell you this because I thought you might think it was weird. But me and this other person that I know you've been communicating with, we live in the same apartment complex. And they were like, oh, it's like Melrose Place over there. This place is
Even those
fun.
people from
Barbecues
Norway, they're in our
and
apartment.
Yeah, they have great Christmas card photos. I was just going to say one more thing real quick about like going back to this being like a true crime podcast or a mystery podcast. So here's the thing. When you get this story from this guy at the end, I get stories like this a lot in my job when I'm doing what we call like background histories. And then I'm like, let me talk to either some friends or family members of this person and see what their version of events is. And if it backs up and matches, you're like, okay, this person's telling me the truth. A lot of times it doesn't. So like, why didn't we talk to anybody else that knew this guy once we knew who he was, right? That's what I would have done. I would have been like, okay, cool. Now that we know who this person is, like, find out some people that actually know him and find out like, what's the real fucking deal here?
All right, let's do what we do. Let's our listeners know, should they check out the podcast, Beth's Dead? Laura Bricker, thumbs up or thumbs down for Beth's Dead?
This was a thumbs down. There's a couple reasons for this. Number one, I never listened to the original podcast that these characters came from, so I had really no basis for past connection with the people in this story that would make me invested in wanting to listen to it. And I think a lot of this for me, I thought I was getting into a true crime story and a true crime podcast, a mystery. It was more of kind of like a reflective look back at something that happened to these characters in this story. But it meandered and meandered. And there was a lot of what I felt like filler in it that just made it sort of hard to listen to because we heard a lot of the same things over and over again. And, you know, I think for a certain person that actually had listened to this original podcast that these people were in, they would probably be really interested to know this backstory because they were in those message boards and they were on the website and they knew who some of the people were that were referenced in this. But for me, I just really didn't feel any connection to this story. I think there were some interesting things about parasocial relationships that could have been fleshed out more as a result of what was in this story. But unfortunately, that didn't really happen here. So for me, this was a thumbs down.
Toby Ball.
This is, I think, honestly, one of the harder things for me to give a thumbs up or thumbs down to, because I feel like the actual experience of listening to the podcast at times is just not great. And I think I listened to it under the absolute best possible circumstances where I was just happy to listen to people talk. I was doing some other stuff, but I could still focus on what they were saying. If I'd been like kind of in a hurry to hear it or whatever, I sure would have driven me completely freaking nuts. So there's that. It kind of meanders, goes at its very slow pace. At the same time, at times during the podcast, and then certainly looking back on it, there's maybe a small number of podcasts that were as revealing about the hosts of the podcast, perhaps unintentionally. I mean, I think like clearly unintentionally in some aspects and then maybe intentionally in other aspects. But looking back on it, it's like you kind of feel like you've gone through this sort of mental, emotional journey with people who, while I think very sort of introspective and kind of in touch with how they're feeling about things, don't necessarily see all these things accurately or objectively, so that at the end, you're like, okay, did you not kind of get what just happened over these past few hours? Like there's twists and turns in this thing or whatever. But to me, the biggest thing was how the lessons that the host did or didn't take, to me, seemed like the biggest twist, because it just seemed like my kind of takeaway was so different than their takeaway from it. I found that sort of disparity to be, in retrospect, why I thought it was sort of a valuable time that I spent listening to this. And maybe that's partly coming as being a fiction writer and just being really interested in how people assess the actions they take and the actions that people are taking around them and sort of the way they try and process those things. So I don't know what that equals, in some ways it's like thumbs down for the execution, thumbs up for the overall thing. So this is thumb sideways. I guess I would say I'd give it the mildest of thumbs up, because I did actually like enjoy about 2/3 of my listening time. Like I kind of was into the story, but again, if it had been in a different circumstance and I was like trying to get through it in order to get it all done in time to review it, I would have been pulling my hair out. But if I was going on a long drive or something, I would think this is pretty good. So I'm a little bit on the 0 to 100. I'm like a 53.
Ooh, Kevin Flynn.
Yeah, it kills me to say this because I really wanted to like this and I really respect what they accomplished and how they influenced Rebecca. And so that means that's how they influenced the four of us. And if it were not for Elizabeth and Andy, then Rebecca would say that we should just be writing books.
No, I wouldn't.
She'd probably get out of writing books. But I think this podcast is just so very lazy. It doesn't really do anything to sort of tell a story other than just have three people sit around and talk about something. There's really no effort put into pulling in people that don't already know the personalities here. There were a couple of places to go. I think primarily the issue is they've got one episode of story and only 10 episodes to fill. So there were places to go and things to do, but they just couldn't be bothered to do any of it. It seems like the most prep and work that they did was to pull old clips and print off old emails, when instead what they should have been doing is having somebody tell this story and interviewing Elizabeth and Andy and put together something that was coherent and that could decide what would be interesting to the listeners and not just interesting to the three of them sitting around and having a conversation. And so that's why I'm so terribly disappointed in this. I really wanted to like it. I really wanted them to like me. I really wanted to be friends with them. It's probably not going to happen now, even though we've just done a whole bunch of stuff with friends with had bad podcasts that we put thumbs down on. I have to go thumbs down on this. Unless you're in a job where you have a parasocial relationship and you find that interesting, or you're a big fan of their original podcasts, then this really isn't for you. There's no way to sort of get into this unless you just want to hear three interesting people talk about the old days. And I just feel like they could have done something other than wait until episode 8 to explore some of the bigger issues here. So really disappointed.
Stand behind it, Kevin.
Yeah. I'm not backing away from it.
Both of you said you felt bad. Just say thumbs down.
I was always going to be thumbs down
then
on
just
this.
say that. It's fine. They can take it. They're doing fine.
No, I'm explaining. Sometimes, sometimes it hurts to tell somebody, look, I really like you, but this is really bad. And this was really bad. So I am thumbs down and I'm sticking by it.
That's fair. First of all, I want to give a shout out to my friend, very talented photographer, Greta Ribas, who recommended that we listen to this podcast because she wanted to hear us talk about it, but also was also the person who introduced me to Elizabeth and Andy way back in like 2012. She's a very talented photographer. She just did that New York Times story. She did the photographs about the woman on the Coldplay Kiss Cam. There was a feature about her, and Greta did the photography for that. She's incredible. Anyway, shout out to Greta.
Those were great photos.
Greta is incredibly fucking
stuck
talented.
Out to me, not even knowing who they were.
Yeah, she's wonderful. I have to go thumb sideways on this because I have to think about the listeners generally. For the same reason I go thumbs up on shit TV that we might technically say, this is all the reasons it sucks, but I loved watching it. I have to go thumbs up because I know that's the viewer experience for a lot of people. If you have never heard of Elizabeth Laime and Andy Rosen, you will hate this podcast. You will very likely hate it. If you were a devoted listener to theirs and you like them and you know who they are, you will see it as a likable but very flawed podcast. And it would, for me, at that point, get like a thumbs up because if everybody knew who they were, I'd be like, okay, well, there is enough nostalgia here for everyone to lean on to give it a thumbs up. That being said, you know what this should have been? Unfortunately,
2 episodes?
Reply All doesn't exist anymore. This would have been a fantastic 3 or 4 episode series on Reply All. It would have been fucking fantastic for that. It would have been a great This American Life episode. It is a really good story. The problem is the execution is not compelling, unfortunately. Listening to, even as a person who knows and likes them, listening to long cuts from a podcast from 10 plus years ago, listening to long emails that were read in their entirety, it really slowed down any sense of suspense or stakes. I mean, I knew immediately what was going on in this podcast, which is fine because we're hearing their experience of it. And what should have been like a really climactic moment in the show was really hampered by a very, very long hemming and hawing about whether or not to even have the climactic moment in the show. So yeah, it is a great concept. It really is. Very likable people, as we've all said. Really not good enough execution to land with anybody who has never heard of these shows before. So I have to give it a thumb sideways. There were parts of it I liked very much and other parts of it where I was like, how fast in a fast forward can I listen to this while still understanding what's going on? And I hate feeling that way about any show, but that's how I felt about this one. So solid sideways for me, Kevin. Solid. I'm a 50, not a 53. All right, now it's time for my favorite part of the podcast, a little something I like to call the crime of the week.
Crime of the week!
They say a penny isn't worth much unless it's the last of them. The U.S. Mint stopped pressing the copper coins in November. The 1-cent pieces cost about 3.5 cents to make and are no longer very useful in the modern economy. The Treasury Department just auctioned off 232 special collector sets containing the final Lincoln pennies pressed by the Philadelphia and Denver mints and a 24-karat gold penny. Experts had no idea what the going rate for these coins would go for, but it was high. The sets sold for tens of thousands of dollars. The final set, which contained the last pennies ever produced in the U.S., went for $800,000. Billions of pennies remain in circulation but will slowly disappear as they're turned into banks that won't reissue them. It's predicted that businesses will start rounding out their transactions to the nearest nickel. Meanwhile, it's hard to argue that the last pennies weren't a good investment. The auction raised a total of $16.7 million from collectors, and that's a pretty good return on what was actually about $6.96 worth of coins. Rest in peace, Lincoln. So, panel, what are you going to do with your remaining pennies? Laura Bricker.
Have you ever seen that epoxy artwork where they put stuff in and
Sure
they
have.
put that really...
I watch HGTV, Laura.
Yeah, I want to make some little thrones out of pennies for my cats to sit upon.
What
little
about
penny thrones?
What about you, Toby? What are you going to be doing with your remaining pennies?
I'm just going to be exchanging them for people's thoughts.
Oh, what about you, Kevin?
I'm going down to a big wishing well and just going to throw them all in and then maybe go to Coinstar.
I am going to leave them on the front seats of people who are looking for a missing person in the New Hampshire North Woods
Scare the fuck out
to
of
make
them.
them think that I am threatening them when I am actuality just not threatening them at all. All right, that's going to do it for us, Laura Bricker. If folks want to reach out to you online, how can they find you?
You can find me at Laura Bricker on Instagram and Blue Sky.
What about you, Toby?
Every Wednesday, you can find me on your favorite podcast app talking about Rip Current, but on Blue Sky at TobyBall NH and on Instagram at TobyBall603.
What about you, Kevin?
I'm at Kevin P. Flynn, and P stands for parasocial.
It does. I never knew that.
Yeah, and Penny.
And Patrick. You can follow me everywhere at Reb Lavoie, but please watch my YouTube show, Something's Off, that I do with Mel Barrett. You can also get the audio of that show on our Patreon. You can get lots of stuff on our Patreon, in fact, like 1,000 episodes of stuff, and you can follow the show everywhere at Crime Writers On. Mostly, though, you should join our incredible Crime Writers On Facebook community. They're incredible. Our theme song was composed and performed by Tyler Gibbons, and our line editor is the wonderful Livy Burdett. The EP of this show is Kevin. This show was recorded in the Caitlin Rogers Project Studio, also known as Studio C, the closet in our New Hampshire basement where we also record a marriage podcast filled with unqualified advice.
Yeah, that's true.
On behalf of all the crime writers, thanks so much for listening. We will catch you later.
So, how are you adjusting to these sort of late night recordings?
Yeah, I mean, the latest one was the first one I did with you guys when I got back here. And I could feel my energy starting to flag towards the end.
Yeah.
The deep dives are going to be tough. I mean, I think those are going to be sort of like 2 to 3:30 in the morning or whatever.
Yeah.
So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah.
But
it's easy to lose your train of thought.
my friend who's in the Navy was just like, oh yeah, so you pull a couple bad shifts. It's like, okay. All right, dude.
Very good.
Partners in Crime Media.